right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning into the Sports Card Therapist, where I give you a behind the scenes look at my hobby hustle and sprinkling some self care and wellness on top of that. I'm Rob Gerard, your Sports Card Therapist. And whether if you're listening to me on iTunes, Spotify, or watching on YouTube, welcome to the podcast. Man, oh man, the day this is dropping, New Year's Eve. It is, I tell you, it's been quite a journey with these roundtables the end of December. This is the final roundtable. This is going to be roundtable number 11 from December. So thank you to everyone that's been tuning in. Thank you for all the love, all the feedback. I've been getting some absolutely amazing feedback I don't even want to repeat because it'll sound like I'm making it up. So I'm not even going to say it, but it's just been incredible hearing from people. And hopefully these roundtables will be around for quite some time as far as, just people coming back, checking them out, listening to them, learning from them. And tonight should be no different. Tonight being the final roundtable, we are calling this the Dumpster Fire Roundtable because we have no idea what it's going to bring. All I know is I wanted to bring three of the best minds in the hobby to the show. So Chris, Jeremy, Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited to have you guys on. If you guys want to go around real quick and just introduce yourselves, we can go clockwise. Chris, you can start if you want.
Sure. Yep. Name is Chris McGill or Chris Hoge. Hoge is not my last name. It's an abbreviation of House of Jordans. Not pronounced Hodge, like Hoge. Just pissed off a lot of people right there already. Let's see. I'm primarily a collector of Michael Jordan first and foremost. But since coming back to the hobby 6.5 years ago, I now have added collections of Luka Doncic, Nikola Jokic, a little bit of LeBron James, Christian McCaffrey, Le'Veon Bell, and a bunch of other kind of random oddball stuff. So as a collector, that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I do work in the industry. I was a co-founder of CardLadder, and to this day, I am the head of research there. And even though we're now part of the Collectors Holdings parent company, I still operate as the CEO and work on CardLadder every day and night. Thanks for having me, Rob.
Absolutely, Chris. And so Chris is someone that, along with Josh in season 2 of Sports Card Therapist, they had monthly spots on the show. So they were coming back monthly. We were having some incredible conversations and really, Chris, I don't know if it's I know you went to law school. I don't know if it's the law school side of you, but you are truly like an encyclopedia, it feels like, when it comes to not only cards, but when it comes to the market as well. It's been, just such an impressive individual, man. Seriously.
Thank you, Rob. I prefer dictionary, but encyclopedia or thesaurus, if we want to go with that. We'll take encyclopedia.
Love it, man. Love it. All right. So Jeremy, you're up.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me. My name is Jeremy Lee. I've been a collector, a hobbyist for over 40 years. My whole life, I kind of live and breathe the hobby. I collect Hall of Fame rookie cards. I collect, baseball, hockey, basketball, football. Collect 90s inserts, hockey and basketball. A little bit of Griffey, a little bit of Barry Sanders, a little bit of Jerry Rice, and I collect like auto patches from Upper Deck hockey cards going into the 2000s, 2010s. We'll see what I do with the 2020s. I collect, Dumpster Fire does accurately reflect my collection because I am all over the place, but believe it or not, I'm quite organized in my collecting. And on Instagram, I'm jlee_sportscardslive. So Sports Cards Live is my YouTube show that I've been doing for coming up on, it'll be 3 years in April. And it's a live and interactive interview show. Rob, you've been a guest on it at least once. Chris, you've been on 5 or 6 times, I think, by now over the years. And still going strong with that. I do a couple of other shows as well. I do a show for Collectible. I do a show for PWCC with their premier auction. And earlier this year, I accepted and took a job with Tag Grading. So I'm all in on the hobby as of this year. I'm a 25-year CPA. I've retired that career to go into the hobby full time. And I'm looking forward to, I'm excited about this show, Rob, talking a bit about maybe 2022, what we learned, what happened. And I'm really excited about the future in 2023.
Oh man, that's great. And I tell you, I think Jeremy, you are absolutely. I mean, I look at Jeremy and Chris, just because we haven't gotten to Matt yet, but Jeremy and Chris, you guys are absolutely two of the hardest working people in the hobby. I've heard Chris and his beautiful wife Christina say multiple times that they haven't took a day off in like 3 years, if not more. It's incredible. And Jeremy, you with all the hats that you're wearing now, it's unbelievable. I mean, I've done a month of roundtables, and I've been doing like a reflection episode on Saturdays. I've been doing 4 episodes a week for only about 4 weeks now, and I'm just about done, and I'm exhausted. And that still doesn't even touch what it is that you guys do. So it's crazy. And let me just say this. 2 things I've learned so much from both of you guys, but Chris, I could remember when you first came on my show about 18 months ago. You came on as a guest, and we were talking about card prices going up and down, and I could remember you saying, it stuck with me. You said, listen, card prices are going to go up and down. We don't have complete control over that, but if someone's taking a loss, you hope that it's kind of a cascading effect where someone takes a little bit and then they sell it. Someone takes a little. You never want someone to just take a massive loss on a card or multiple cards, because chances are they'll leave the hobby. So that always kind of stuck with me, Chris, when you said that. And then Jeremy, and I've told you this, Jeremy, it's not who do you collect, but it's what do you collect. And that's always stuck with me. Like, what do you collect? And I find myself now, I'll be interviewing people and I'll correct myself right on my podcast, and I'll say, wait, I meant what do you collect? So you guys absolutely super influential. And so Matt, on to you, sir.
Let me unmute. My name is Matt, Matty C on Instagram. I'm a collector, primarily vintage, or going up into the 80s, which is when I was a kid, which I guess is now vintage. It's hard to believe those things are like 40 plus years old.
I refuse to call anything in the 80s vintage, by the way. I'm sorry.
I'm looking at them like, holy shit, this is like 40 something. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm 40 something. But I was just thinking, as Chris and Jeremy were speaking, it's so impressive that you guys, and it must say a lot about how fun the hobby is, that you work in it so intensely. And Chris, you're saying working around the clock on that. I was taking a look at that website and how involved it is and all the research that much go into it. And Jeremy, you're saying that tag grading place, which is, by the way, I'm really rooting for their success. I think what they're doing is fantastic.
Yeah.
And all the other companies you work for. And yet you're still both so happy with collecting, which says a lot. Because a lot of times when you enjoy something and then you start doing that for your profession, so you said you tend to lose some of the joy for it. I wondered if that's happened to me sometimes, but so far not with work. Anyway, I just think that says a lot. There's something to be said about that.
Yeah, and Matty, let me just, I guess, because I don't know if we'll get to this, but just to give a little bit of background on you, you're a huge Mickey Mantle collector. If you go to your Instagram, which is Matty C_collection, you will see just years and years of Mickey Mantle on card, in person signed autos, which are just absolutely incredible. And one thing that has really, I mean, the Mickey Mantle collecting and the vintage collecting, that's one thing, right? But I think another thing that has really got you and I to really start conversating on a regular basis are, and Chris, your story posts as well, which are just filled with informative posts every single day, it feels like. But Matt, you will constantly take a PSA 8 and a PSA 10, line them up right next to each other, but you won't show the grades, and you'll say, show me the difference here. And you'll put the price of what one sold at. You'll say, this one sold at 400, this one just sold at 360,000. Show me the difference. And just the way you kind of get the mind turning a little bit, and it's constant too. Or what I've seen you do is you'll take one that's like graded authentic and put it up against a PSA 10 or a PSA 8, and it's like, and the price difference is insane. So your story posts alone just are incredibly informative. I mean, you really do a deep dive when it comes to eye appeal.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I just try to make fellow collectors, for us to look at things, kind of step out of our usual kind of indoctrinated grade centric perspective, and take a fresh look at, wait, that that and this side juxtaposed. What about, sometimes, like I'll say, I remember one thing you and I were talking about in the past is I'll take two cards in the same grade and also showed that sometimes it's interesting to see there's not much of a disparity sometimes between, let's say, the best 8 and a 10, or certainly the best 9s and a 10, anytime really for any two adjacent grades, right? But sometimes, interestingly enough, there's also a massive disparity between two cards that have the very same grade. So it's almost there, so many different ways to look at it and analyze it, and just kind of, it's healthy, I think, to question the grading paradigm, the grading system that it's so easily swallowed when you first come into it, and then you kind of go, well, wait a second. It's kind of like getting unplugged from the matrix in film terminology.
Yeah. And so before we move on and really jump into the roundtable here, Matty C, born in Brooklyn, moved out to LA. You're a film writer. You actually wrote the, I don't know if you want to call it the hood classic, Paid in Full. You wrote Paid in Full?
Yeah, that was my first job back when I was 22, maybe just turning 23 out of college.
Unbelievable. Mackay Pfeiffer, Cameron,
Wood Harris, a great Wood Harris.
Dash. I mean, what was that?
Wood Harris is phenomenal. Phenomenal.
Man,
I mean, just Mackay also. Mackay, I would later, years later, I would, I bumped into Mackay a few times, and Wood and I did like a basketball league together one year when I first moved out to LA. Just it was really, I mean, and Regina, just a fantastic cast up and down Eastside Morales. Really, looking back, it was a really lucky experience especially for your first project. Later I'd get a lot of bad luck, so I kind of used up all the good luck on the first one.
And then also Rambo Last Blood, right?
Yes.
So just like you've done some you've done some really cool stuff. You're big into collecting. So just kind of wanted to throw that out there, because following you on Instagram, or even just kind of BSing with you on Instagram, you would never know it at all. And I think randomly one night we were DMing, and somehow it just kind of came up, and it was like, holy moly, that's really cool.
I forget how it was in some kind of reference, but yeah, because I don't do social media except for the card thing, so I try to keep it really all about that. But again, I love what I do, and I love, like, who born in '76, who wouldn't, I mean, writing Rambo was surreal. It was really, I mean, we use that word a lot inside, but it really was. You're like, wait, you're Rambo, we're writing Rambo together. It was nuts.
Yeah. All right. So, okay, one last thing before we jump into the roundtable. Chris, last night at the time of recording this, you witnessed one of the greatest basketball performances of all time.
Shit.
You were in the arena for Luka.
I was there.
What was his line again? What did he put up?
60, 21, and 10.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was, it was so hard to talk about that game because you can get lost in the stats. You can forget they were down 9 points with 33 seconds left. I mean, over half the arena left while they were, on the precipice of losing. But there was a miraculous comeback. And then, the thing that makes it such a special game, the stats were really cool, but what made it so special was, like, he did that impossible lucky scenario where you make a free throw. Yeah, you miss the second free throw on purpose. It bounces off of forehands. He catches it and just flings it at the basket, and it goes in with a second left. And
then he did his little jig afterwards.
And then he did his dance. He said he thought that they had won, but they hadn't. So that's why he did the dance, he says.
But unbelievable.
The mix.
So I think
snatching defeat from the jaws of victory.
The poor Knicks. Man.
Poor Knicks.
So to jump into it, I guess. So there's a lot of Luka collectors out there, right? But I think arguably you have one of the strongest Luka collections in the world. I would have to imagine. I mean, you have multiple. I'll take a guess and say multiple $500,000 Lukas. Tell me about your idea around collecting, around prospecting, because really that's what you were doing. You were in on Luka early, right? So what are your thoughts on prospecting and even just in terms of a bigger picture, some of the prices that these unproven players go for?
Yeah, so I definitely do not have multiple $500,000 Lukas, but I do have some nice ones.
I'm quite certain I'm not far off. But okay.
Well, and I'm a small fish in the Luka pond. There are some collectors that I admire and I try to emulate who are in a different echelon than me. But here's the thing with Luka, and I don't think this will shock anybody. I don't think even the Luka collector community would disagree with this. Luka's prices are just way too high. And it was fun to collect him when he was a baby in the NBA. And now, it's very stressful. And Christina and I collected a few cards of his. We added a few to the collection earlier this year. And I mean, they have tanked in value since we added them because his market has corrected as sharply as anybody's in the hobby over the course of 2022. So, that's part and parcel of collecting a player whose legacy is not cemented whatsoever, but is building it. And it's just the reality of young players. And then that analysis doesn't only apply to Luka, it applies to pretty much all of them who have a lot of excitement and media fanfare surrounding them. But by the same token, I'm not sure that the juice is worth the squeeze, but the premium that we pay to be able to collect some of the most exciting young players is in part justified because of the experience that you get to enjoy as a small stakeholder in the career outcome of that player. There really is something unique and special about having a little more tied up in the outcome of the game than just being a fan. Although this all originates from fandom. But, being able to root for your player and then feel like, hey, I believed in that player and their success is in some small way, mine. That's pretty neat feeling. And so when you have a cool game like last night or something neat happens, you say, hey, I'm a little more involved in this than the average person. Means something to me. But by the same token, I mean, is the premium worth it? Probably not. But I've never been a rational collector anyway, Rob. So who cares?
Yeah.
Jeremy, I have a question for Chris though.
Yeah.
Did you because I'm always curious because I don't collect any modern.
Sure.
How did you come to be fond of that particular player? What was your initial exposure to him? Was it something you liked about his game or a connection to where he played in the past, or were you a fan of the team and he was like, up and coming for them? Or was it a more, and I don't mean this pejoratively, was it a more like mercenary analysis of like, this guy's going to be good? And I'm curious because I don't have any experience with that.
You can tell Matt is a writer because he's eliciting the story of how it happened.
That's how everything to me is a story. I need to know the story of the cards I have, where they come from, who owned it, when did he get it? So yeah, it's all that makes me a rational collector too. I think all of us collectors have to be irrational because we love these things. But go on, I'm really interested.
That's great. I mean, honestly, I was a huge basketball fan in the 90s. Loved the Houston Rockets and Hakeem Olajuwon. Loved Michael Jordan and my hometown Chicago Bulls. And then I drifted away from basketball and being like a huge pro sports fan. I went into the music industry. I did a lot of other things. But then when I came back to collecting, it wasn't really through sports. It was just through the love of collecting. And I didn't even really follow mainstream sports still. The first few years I came back, I was just focused on Michael Jordan cards. But Christina and I started dabbling in modern products, after 2 or 3 years of being back in the hobby. And so it just so happened that we went into modern products in the 2018-19 NBA season. And that was right when Luka was a rookie. We didn't know anything about him, but we just wanted to open some modern basketball. We did. We went on blowout forums. We were following these products and seeing what people were saying about who the best players were to collect. And people were like, yeah, Luka is a good one. Trae Young is a good one. And so we just started hunting for Luka cards just because, he was the one to get. And then we got some. And then all of a sudden we're like, hey, these cards are cool. What's this player all about anyway? And we started watching his games. And then we were like, hey, this guy's really good. This is fun. And, snowballed from there. So it was the cards. It was just literally the pursuit of wanting to collect modern cards and just happening upon a really good prospect during his rookie year.
Cool, thanks. I was always curious about that, for how people get into those players.
Jeremy, do you think that collecting modern players is more fun than vintage, in your opinion? Because you do a little bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different sort of fun. I wouldn't say it's more fun. I wouldn't say it's less fun. I think that you obviously, Chris said, you have that added, and he talks about paying a premium. You're paying a premium to be able to watch a player who's currently playing and follow along their career, follow along with the cards. It's definitely fun, but it can be excruciating as well. One injury for 2 weeks can tank their values if you care about that. And it can also, hurt your excitement for collecting the player. Never mind if they go out for a season, or if they're caught using PEDs, or there's all these other things that can happen. There's a lot of risk in collecting modern players. One of the biggest risks I've always found, and this goes back decades at this point, is, and it depends why you're collecting a player. If you are a fan of a team, let's say Chris, and I know he wasn't, but let's say he was a lifelong Dallas Mavericks fan, and all of a sudden this great rookie, Luka Doncic, comes along and he decides, hey, he's our new rookie, I'm going to collect him. And he goes all in. And he loves the Dallas Mavericks first and Luka Doncic second, which is usually the way most people collect. Mm-hmm. They are a big fan of a team, then they collect their player. And then that player gets traded or signed somewhere else in free agency. And what you'll see on social media and message boards is, well, my player just got traded, everything is for sale. And people are very disappointed by that, as they should be.
Yeah.
We'll use Chris as a case study here. What he has over all those people is that he collected Luka first, not the Dallas Mavericks. So if Luka gets traded, Chris doesn't care. Chris and Christina don't care. They're going to follow Luka, probably move to the city he goes to again, right? They've already done it once, so they'll do it again so that they can follow their favorite player. And they're very fortunate for that because, again, most people, if you're a Yankees collector, you're collecting Judge. Look when he was about to sign across the country earlier, there was heartbreak amongst the Yankee collector loyalists. Yeah. But if you're a Judge fan because you've been collecting him or following his career since the minors, maybe you don't care where he plays. So, your question, Rob, do I think collecting modern is more fun? No, I actually think it's more stressful than collecting retired players.
It's very stressful because I have friends. I remember I was on both sides of that coin, Jeremy. As a kid, my experience was, Chris, what you had with Luka. I opened a pack, got a Dwight Gooden record breaker in '86 Topps when I was 9 turning 10, and I was like, this guy looks awesome. And and I got into the Mets and I just started watching them. But so I was a Gooden and Strawberry guy first. But then when they went to the Yankees, I followed them to the Yankees, and then I was just like, then I was all Yankees. And then when they were both done, and then my man Cone comes over to the Yankees, and it's all. So I'm all of a sudden I know the Yankees, and then those guys are gone. I'm like, well, I don't know any of the Mets, so I was the guy first thing. But then I was with the Yankees, and then dabbled in with my son, buying some modern stuff of Jeremy. Now just what you said. Oh, Gary Sanchez is our guy. We saw how that worked out, right? And so many other Yankee, this is our guy. And then, I'm not going to get into how the Yankees ruin most of their prospects and all that stuff. That's a rabbit hole. I won't time suck everything, but it sours you because you're like, I was into these guys, I was into these cards, and wait, now these cards are worthless because they're not in pinstripes anymore. So I've seen both. I've seen both sides of that.
Oh, I've lived through this. One of my football player that I primarily collect is Christian McCaffrey, and this year mid-season he was traded from the Carolina Panthers to the 49ers. And McCaffrey doesn't have a ton of collectors by any stretch, but there are a few. But most of them, as Jeremy pointed out, originate as Panthers collectors who just landed on him because he was one of their better players. So when he got traded, I had made a small group chat on Instagram to try and gather all the McCaffrey collectors and just watch the games together. And, we all celebrate and mourn when he gets injured and misses 2 years. Also have experienced that as well, and values taken as a result. But we got them all together. And once he got traded to the 49ers, most of the guys who were Panthers oriented were okay at first. And then they started leaving the chat when we were sending 49ers propaganda, and like 49ers hype stuff. And like, we're all getting excited, like, oh, look what he did, this week. And they're just like, they had to, a few of them had to leave because they didn't want to talk about the 49ers. They didn't want to hear about the 49ers. They liked McCaffrey, but they're Panthers people first. So it rings true what Jeremy and Matt have said.
I bet a lot of happy 49ers fans were like, I'll take your cards now. Now they're all That's my guys. The cards find a new home, a new happy home, right?
There's a card transfer underway. For sure.
I don't know how many of you guys or Rob, your listeners, are familiar with hockey, but I live in Calgary, and my team is the Calgary Flames. And we had two players, Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk, and both of them are superstars. And they were the core of the team, the future of the team. They both left this past off season. Oh. And they were the focus of everybody's collections out in Calgary. So imagine that your two best players leave, the two focuses of your collection leave. What do you do now? I mean, if you're a Flames fan first, you're not going to cheer for them on their new team. So again, just another example of the risks associated with collecting a modern player. And I think that if you're going to do that, make sure that you really have to assess. You have to look inside, do a self-assessment of, if they get traded at any time, will I still want to own their cards? Will I still want to pursue more cards in their new uniform? Because if not, you might just want to kind of pump the brakes there and look for another angle.
Yeah, and Jeremy, they can oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say another thing that touches on is, Jeremy, you mentioned the stress, because when you're collecting someone that is in the present. And I've had a small handful of cards with active players. You had mentioned if there's an injury or if there's PEDs, it can also be their approach. That I know if I have a lot of frustration with the Yankees because of. I remember their batting coach this year was quoted as saying, like, when he was asked, like, don't you guys think that you should have a more bat-on-ball, contact-oriented approach? He's like, no, we're not going to learn a new skill this late. And I'm like, wow, you just admitted that you guys can't make contact. And so, you get frustrated. If you get frustrated with even their approach to the game, it's an interesting dynamic. Like as Chris said, there's more of an investment, but I mean, I get anxiety from a card auction, let alone watching. It's not for everybody, Matt, man. It's not for everybody, I bet.
And it's because we don't know these players. We don't know what's going on in their mind. We collect them based on what we see and what we hear, what we read, but you don't know what they're doing in the background. You don't know how committed they are to their team, to their teammates, to the jersey they're wearing, etc. So yeah, it's there's so many unknowns as collectors, and that's why you really have to be sure that you're going to want this player's cards if certain things happen.
Oh, dude, I have a very quick anecdote. When I came out to California, I wound up randomly becoming friends with a key Met. And, out of respect, you wouldn't want to talk baseball a lot. So, and I was, 20, this is like 23, 22. And so I went and asked him, like, one day we're both hanging out, drinks are flowing, and I'm like, listen, I got to ask you something. I've been waiting for months to ask. And I was huge strawberry. Like, strawberry was one of my. I mean, it was him and Gooden were like my youth. And it always bothered me that Strawberry didn't get his 40th home run in, I think it was 87. There was a series at Busch Stadium in St. Louis, and like he didn't play. And I'm like, what? I can't. And I hated the manager, it was Davey Johnson. I'm like, why did he bench him? And I'm like, why? Why did he not? And the guy told me, and I want to protect his name. He was like, oh, he benched. He wasn't benched. David didn't bench him. He just was partying. He didn't want to play. And it broke. I heard my soul break. Like the 10-year-old, he was like, what do you mean he didn't want to get his 40th home run? And I'm just thinking, if I knew that in the midst of my Darryl collecting, it would have shattered me as a kid. It would have completely shattered me, and I would have thrown all his cards out. So it's again, look at these guys that get hit for PEDs now. Same thing, I bet.
And to kind of piggyback, I think, off what Jeremy and Matt, what you're saying now, I've been seeing, and I'm sure we all have, right, a lot of memes about Luka collectors versus Trae Young collectors, like, and how they're feeling and stuff. And imagine how the Iverson collectors feel when looking at the fact that like they were like this close to being a Kobe collector, but they just felt like Iverson had more heart, or more skill. And then now, decades later, Iverson is giving these interviews like, I just didn't want to play. I didn't want to practice. I wasn't Kobe. Kobe was a different animal. That wasn't me. I partied. Like, so it's like you have like the entire city of Philadelphia, not to mention a lot of card collectors that he still has a cult following when it comes to cards, right? Iverson. People are diehard Iverson collectors. But to hear players give these kind of interviews, it's like, oh. So I wonder, Chris, and I have like two questions for you, Chris. One, how do you feel, or how did you feel when you would randomly see pictures of like Luka looking like he was overweight? Last year, he was looking like overweight. There was no way around that. He looked like he was 15 pounds heavier than he was 6 months before. And then also I want to follow that up with, you said you were buying big cards when the market was just up and going high. You're supposed to be one of the smartest minds in the hobby, and here you are still buying cards at the peak, right? So I'm curious, like, what was going on in your head when you're buying such big cards at its peak? Well, I mean, obviously you didn't know what the peak was going to be or when it was going to go, but you knew that they were breaking records. So,
well, Rob, I was setting out to lose money, so I think I succeeded at a high level. No, it was okay. So first of all, Luka being overweight, I've never related to an athlete more. So that just endeared me to him so much. Dude, I have a blind faith in Luka that may or may not be justified. So with the overweight stuff, I just he's a chubby boy. What are you gonna do? Okay, and then on the big cards, I mean, they were just the most poorly timed purchases imaginable. I guess, if I wanted to see the glasses half full, maybe one of the reasons why those cards were made available is because they were too expensive and that the sellers were smart enough to realize, hey, I should probably get rid of these. I mean, I know both guys really enjoyed the cards, but I think they were also thinking, hey, look, this is probably too high. So, and maybe those cards would have never become available if they didn't get too high. So maybe that's a small consolation prize, is that I was able, the opportunity to get them occurred.
And if you enjoy them, what difference does it make? I mean, if they're a centerpiece of your collection, who gives a flying shit, part of my French, what it costs? I mean, I've at the time made what were insane, like, oh, who's this moron paying this? Who are you to tell me what I do with my money? It's my money.
That's right.
It's my money. Exactly. I want this, and that's that.
Yeah, and I mean, those cards are socked away deep in our collection. So, maybe who knows? Who knows what the future holds? But I know this much. I know that those we like. So two of the cards we got were the Luka Rookie Optic Gold BGS 9.5 and the Luka Select Concourse Gold PSA 10, and those are two of my favorite cards. Those cards are really important to our collection, and they're two of the cards I enjoy the most.
I can relate to it. It's a rated rookie. It's got the rated rookie thing on modern. See, I can relate to that, even though I don't know what you're talking about. That icon, that and like the little Topps Trophy Cup, they were things that you saw that
Yeah,
little
yeah.
rated rookie icon. It was like, I mean, that'd make a good tattoo.
I think a lot of collectors are just buying cards all the time too. Like never mind the fact that, you know, Chris bought a couple big cards at an inopportune time, but these are cards that weren't coming available any other time, so you have to buy them when you can. But if you're talking about more common cards that aren't like 1-of-1s or out of 5, we as collectors, I mean, I'm buying cards. I don't care where the market's at. I'm always adding cards to my collection. So, and you know what, Chris's answer to your original question, Rob, I thought, Chris, you should have said, "Do as I say, not as I do." And then the other thing regarding Luka, Chris says, you know, I don't know if it's justified after last night's performance. And I know that, you know, one game does not reflect a whole body of work or career, but sometimes one game does stand the test of time. And I think last night might be that game for Luka. And, you know, I know that if I was Chris, I'm coming out of that game last night thinking, or at least feeling, more justified about the decisions I've made over the past several years. And I mean, Chris is one of the first content creators I ever came across, Rob, in my hobby. And I remember I've told Chris the story several times. I used to go for walks in the evenings, and I'd listen to House of Jordans. They were 4 hours long. So they'd drop an episode every whatever couple of weeks, and it would last me a while. But I remember them talking about Luka back in those days, and this precedes anything, you know, that we, you know, this is 5 years ago, probably, maybe even a little bit more. So, just a few additions to Chris's answers to your questions.
So
yeah, put that on my answer. What Jeremy just said, just tag that.
what he said.
Yep.
So, I got you, bro. I got you.
We talked about the downside and the heartbreak of, God forbid, injuries, God forbid PEDs, God forbid getting traded, things like that. But what you just said, you just like hit the nail on the head. Like, last night's game with Luka could be almost like Jordan's playoff loss. But when he scored 63, like, it was like, okay, you know what? This is something huge here. And I would imagine that last night Chris went to bed thinking about Luka, and the first thing you probably thought about this morning when you woke up was Luka's game, right?
It was up there.
And
I don't want to creep people out with what a weirdo I am, so we'll just leave it
there. Cat's out the bag. So,
it's true, it is.
So yeah, Jeremy, I mean, absolutely correct. I mean, it's talk about just feeling, I don't want to say vindicated, but feeling like, I bet your chest was puffed out because, you know, there aren't many people, you can't buy stock in a person per se, but when it comes to the hobby, you can. And you have a pretty significant stock in a player that just put on a career performance that I think people still feel very strongly about. So,
when you go, Rob, when you go that heavily into a player, when you player collect, that's what you're waiting for. That's what you're hoping to happen. So when it does, you've got to enjoy it, and you've got to puff your chest out walking out of the game and waking up in the morning and feeling good and hoping that he follows it up again and that the career keeps on going along that same trajectory.
Yeah, well said.
But Chris, your end game, it's not to, you know, talking about just leaping on Rob's use of the word stock. Your end game, and I'm just assuming it's not he's going to establish a legacy and then I'm selling these things mercenarily to get profits. Now, again, look, obviously, let's set aside the short-term vagaries of life and cycles, and, you know, maybe you want to buy a dream house at some point, or I mean, let's set aside all that, right? Because there are myriad reasons why one may choose to sell in the future, but ignoring those, you're not in this like, oh, I want this guy to rise like a stop, and there is an exit, and when the stock hits this number, I'm out. Correct?
Correct. And I think you drew an incredibly nuanced distinction that sometimes gets lost when people talk about collections and values and things like that. The distinction you drew is that, you know, somehow you threaded the needle of being cognizant of the fact that these items do have value and that sometimes people do make life decisions that involve selling some of them. But that's different from people who speculate on cards and players for the purpose of creating a short-term or medium-term return on investment.
Correct.
And I've never seen cards as an investment. I don't think I ever will. I see them as collectibles, as something that's just fundamentally different, that's motivated by different consumer behaviors, that's motivated by different passions entirely. And the thing, I grew up in the hobby over the last 6.5 years or so as a Michael Jordan collector, idolizing other collectors who are building masterpiece collections that they want to carry with them for their lives. That's how I've been taught to approach the hobby. That's how I've learned the hobby, is that, I work my butt off so that I can take a percentage of the money that I've earned and buy cards with it. And that's the end goal. That's the end goal.
Yeah, my goal is to hold them forever, forever. Like after I'm dead, what happens with them, I can't. I'm trying to ensure that, but I'm going to control what I can control. It's not a stock. I have like 2 things written on my Instagram. It says collect cards, not stickers, and cards are not stocks. And it's the attempt on the part of many, because again, data is neutral. Right. It's the application or the misapplication or the specious or reductive applications of data the onus for that is on the individual. Right. And much in the same way, it's cards are stocks or cards are a betting slip. And when it hits this, I'm out. I mean, sure, if you want to use it strictly as a financial tool, whether it's Babe Ruth or whether it's Luca, go for it. Right. But it's just as there are many different reasons, motivations behind the purchase. Right. There are many different reasons or ways to collect. Right. It's not just vintage and modern. There are people who are using it just as a financial tool or a betting slip. They view it as such. They like to identify themselves as, I'm an investor. I'm like a day trader. Then there are people like me that are collecting out of nostalgia. Right. I don't see them as stocks, but yet I can see how if someone wants to, but it's interesting. It's the same instrument. It's the same thing, but 2 different people can be doing 2 totally different things with it. Whereas with a stock, it's no one's, I would surmise that very few people are buying a stock out of nostalgia, right? Like, man, there's this new company, man, I remember the Halcyon days in the 50s.
And that logo.
Post-war, Mantle. I mean, I'm not buying that, Google because of that, right? But that's what I guess makes the hobby so interesting, is because 2 different people can buy the same card for 2 entirely different reasons and have 2 completely different philosophies.
Yeah, that's really well said. And it gets tricky trying to navigate that overlap.
Yeah.
Am I participating in a market that is not supported by collectors like myself, but that instead is essentially in a speculative bubble? And trying to figure out and time those things, I've completely given up on that. I just have the grails that I want, and when they become available, I try to do my best to pay market price for it, and let the chips fall where they may afterwards.
So can I ask this question? Because we talk about nostalgia, we talk about investments and collectibles, and one of the things that I think collectibles, and we'll just focus on sports cards, has over your more traditional investments like stocks, is that there is nostalgia for them. So imagine a stock market where there was the added element of nostalgia, how much more valuable certain stocks would be because of that. And that's what we have in the sports card hobby. So I'm not saying that sports cards are investments, although several have proven to be, whether they're winners or losers. But I think that nostalgia is what sets collectibles, maybe specifically sports cards and other collectibles like video games and comic books. That's what sets them apart from traditional investments, or at least one element that sets them apart, and why I think that they are good investment holdings. And for myself, guys, like, I'm a collector first who's become an investor by consequence, because I can't deny that some cards that I bought 20 years ago for $1,000 are worth $5,000 today. That's just the fact of the matter. Is that an investment? Did I make an investment when I deployed $1,000 into my collection 20 years ago? At the time, I just needed the card to check off the box. But it's become an investment because it's gone up in value. Sure, it doesn't spin off dividends. I don't collect rent for it, although maybe I could put it in a museum and charge admission, right? But it's not, there's a lot of argument and narrative out there for or against looking at our cards as investments. It's like they can be in some cases and some under certain microscopes, and under others they are not. But at the end of the day, I come back to nostalgia. That's what it's really all about for, I think, guys like us, all four of us. And I mean, that there is value associated to nostalgia in society. And that's why these things do have some elements of an investment.
It also provide that nostalgia is daily pleasure. It's daily enjoyment. I talk about this with my brother, the GC collection, all the time. He does with Jordan what I do with Mantle. And we always say, and again, Chris nailed it in that the overlap is very difficult to navigate. What I mean by overlap was what Chris meant in the sense of two guys, two entirely different philosophies about the very same thing, cards or sports memorabilia. One guy looking at it as an investment, and I buy it at this, and I sell it this, and one's on the market, and the other guy's going, how could you possibly think that? This is about nostalgia, and I love this player, and I know about this game. And it's you're both right, because it's almost like looking at a painting, right? Two people stare at the same painting. This means this to me, and this means this to me. Well, it means what it means to each of you. And it's both valid. Right? This whole thing, there's too much verses in the whole hobby, I think. It's this versus this and this versus that. Yes. And what's better, this or this? And is it the Jordan Fleer? Is it the Jordan Star? Is it the Mantle 50? What is this?
Who cares?
Where is the octagon, man? I don't see the fucking octagon. Like Mantle's 51 and Mantle's 52 are not pitted in some Thunderdome death match. It doesn't make sense. Right?
And neither is Michael Jordan versus LeBron James.
I don't know. What is this versus this? And this guy's the GOAT. That's the GOAT. It's like these arguments have zero utility. Just enjoy yourself, right?
Well, the utility is the frustration that people. It becomes an outlet on social media for people to try to elevate the player or the item that they are passionate about versus another one. But why can't we just elevate what it is we like and not worry about having to, this whole, Sidney Crosby versus Alex Ovechkin, and another good example. They both had great careers. Who cares? Yes. Who's better?
Well,
they're both wonderful. This
perceived, and it's a totally false perception that things have to be zero sum in the world. They're not zero sum, right? It's like, well, if I like this guy, I'm going to big this guy up and diss this other guy. It's like, no, man, just tell me what you're into and why. And share that enthusiasm, share that passion, right? It's like, it dovetails with my own industry. People go like, oh, Hollywood, and people, they steal your ideas. No, it's like, you just go and share why do you love this movie? Why do you want to write this? Why do you love this? You share. Passion is infectious, right? Share what even if it's a concept, right? Observation about grades or grading companies or the system. Just be passionate without needing to turn everything into a versus, right?
Without needing to knock something else down.
Yeah, it's like vintage versus modern. If you dig that, go dig that, right? Say investor versus collector. If you want to look at it as a stock and you're going to exit and you buy it here and you're day trading with it, go do that. I'm doing something totally different over here. And there's room for all of it, right? What makes it, again, so interesting is what Chris said, is that there's this overlap of philosophies that admittedly are divergent, right? Over the very same widget, over the very same thing, which is a card, right? So that's, I think, what makes it so interesting. But anyway, what I wanted to say, Jeremy, is that the nostalgia is daily enjoyment. We get that. We can't look at our SEP IRAs. I mean, I guess some guys can. I mean, it depends how much money's in it, right? It might make you smile, but you can look at your cards, and that's daily enjoyment. There's a value in that, right?
It's even more, Matt. Matt. I don't know if this happens to you, but I've said it a few times on my show lately that I can look at certain cards and I actually get an emotional, physiological reaction in my stomach. I can feel it. Like I feel it. I don't care about my stocks. All I care about are the numbers on the far right column. I don't care what they're called. I don't care what they look like. Cards elicit this feeling in me. and I don't even know how to articulate what it is. I'm the thesaurus above me probably could, but I mean, there's so much more to it. Cards are, you know, one of my catchphrases, sports cards is a lifestyle. It's literally all consuming. It can be all consuming, for better or for worse at times, but it's there's so much more to it than just what they're worth.
Yeah, you can't. There's so much more. I talk about this with some guys, in that the last thing, and not even last, I don't consider money when I'm looking at my cards at all. I would attempt to articulate and list the things that you were saying, Jeremy, in the sense of it's a connection to the past, to your own childhood in some cases. You could be stressed out about something. You look at a card that you pined for as a kid, or you owned as a kid, and you look at it, and it's better than any Xanax. It's better than any shot of tequila. It's better. You know, it makes you feel fantastic. Then you could look at a card of an athlete. If I look at Mantle, sometimes I think about, you know, what he did to his knee in that World Series game off the Mays fly ball, and how dramatic that was to be a rookie and have all this hype on you, and they hand you number 6 and they think you're going to be in line with you know, Gehrig and Ruth and DiMaggio and all that pressure, and now you wreck your knee, and somehow to come back from that, right? Or to be, you know, a kid from the country coming to a huge city. So I look at that card and sometimes inspiration, or you look at a Kobe card or a Jordan card and think of their mentality, and it inspires you to do something in your own business or your own life. Or you could just look at a card for the aesthetics. You could look at a card for the time period it's from and think of what society was like back then. I mean, all this enjoyment you're getting, all these facets, right? It's as if the card is a gemstone and you have all these different facets that are reflecting light back at you that you're enjoying, right? That enjoyment is value. That's why I don't give a shit when I buy a card. When I bought certain mantles, I remember buying my Big 52 mantle, I fully expected the shit might half in value. I do not care. I could not care less. Similarly, I can't care if it goes up, because if I'm not selling it, it's moot anyway. It's a
hobby.
Illusory
it's
paper
like you're
money.
saying.
Yeah, it's like, what difference does it make? If it's like, what is it? If the tree falls and no one's there to hear it, did it make a sound? If you're not going to sell the card, who gives a shit what it's worth?
Who cares?
The only time it matters what it's worth is the day you sell it.
Yeah, those are great points. Yeah,
go ahead, Chris.
I just wanted to chime this in there because so much of this really resonates with me. You know, I think one of the reasons why we tolerate an abundance of negativity and friction and frustration in the hobby is because the hobby is so enjoyable that you would have to ratchet up the unpleasant parts so high to get me to stop collecting cards that it ain't happening. Like, even if I were to completely leave social media and just, you know, go off and be a collector in my own lane, it wouldn't be as good. I love the community, but I'd still be doing it. I'd still be checking eBay every morning. I'd still be looking at all the major marketplaces. Ever since I rediscovered collecting, it unequivocally has made my life better. And I know for a fact that if I didn't have this hobby, my life wouldn't be as good. So, you know, that's the power of having this collection, just the concept of collecting, the challenges it's constantly presenting, not to mention all the fun that we have while we do it. Like, that's the recipe for why I think this thing is so addicting, why we put up with so much BS is because at the end of the day, we're still going to keep coming back.
You and Jeremy are putting it to the test because now you're working in the industry and collecting. Yes. So you're like, let's see how much negativity I can deal with. Let's see how much balls my balls get broken and I still want to collect.
Right.
Well, that's the thing. You know, you're right about that, Matt. And, you know, Chris alludes to all the controversy and conflict that we see on social media. And one thing that I've learned in order as a coping mechanism for myself is I can always go back to my cards. As much as the social media can try to bring you down or bring you down psychologically because you are so passionate about the hobby, or you've put yourself out there as at least the three of us have in terms of having content. And I don't know, Matt, maybe you have, I don't know if you do a podcast or anything like that, but I know that the three of us do. you know, I can always go to my cards, and it grounds me, and it kind of helps me realize that, listen, all this other stuff is external. Nobody out there who's talking is real. They're not the people that are most close to me. They're not my family. They're not my close friends. Many of them, some of them are now, but I can always go back to my cards and find that happiness in the hobby again. And the other thing that we have the power to do is just not open those apps. Don't go onto Instagram, block, unfollow, mute. These are things that really can help you take back your own hobby experience.
Correct.
And
You
I find myself doing that more and more as there's more and more content out there that I'd rather it not pass by my screen or by my eyes, because it doesn't help me. It doesn't enhance my life. It doesn't do what Chris said. It doesn't make my life better. So I'm going to try to curate not only my collection, but my hobby experience so that it makes my life better.
You got to do that. You got to do that with everything. That's why personally, I don't even do social media outside. I try to stay off the internet and in all respects. But you nailed it. I get a lot of messages where it's like, oh, I'm having a hard time with the hobby and there's negativity. It's like, well, you got to reconnect with your collection. You got to reconnect with the passion, with what's good, right? It's like the best advice I ever got. My uncle was like 95, was, my doctor for many years. And I remember once he said to me, I have a patient, he comes in, he goes, Doc, it hurts me every time I do this. What do I do? He goes, don't do that.
Right.
It's just, that's it. Just don't, if, when that gets negative, like, again, I used to try to participate on chat boards and stuff. And I talk to my brother and be like, yo, man, I'm so heated, because there's no room for nuance. There's no room for, they're human facial expressions, tone, right? Civility. These things are refined away, right? Out of the process. Once you get behind a keyboard, once you're communicating via apps, right? And it can be very toxic. And for me, one of the things that was really bothering me is the notion of people conflating passion with pumping, right? It's like anytime I like something, oh man, you're pumping this, right? Oh, you're pumping this. Like some guy that, was saying like, oh man, you're pumping. I'm like, yeah, dude, you don't know my life. I'm not trying to pump a $27 Mike Schmidt card, bro. Like, this is not, if you knew the truth about me and my daily life, I'm not out to pump this and flip it to you for $100, pal. Like, you got it twisted. But
yeah, you got to be so careful. You got to be so careful what you put out there now, especially if you are out there as an individual in the hobby. You have to really go through a checklist of things before you put anything out there in social media. Otherwise, there are a team of people just waiting to attack, and it makes it a little bit restrictive in how you can enjoy. But you have to just, I think at the end of the day, if you know in your own head that you are authentic and you are not doing anything nefarious, that you should be able to talk about the things that you are passionate about. That's why we join social media, because we want to share our passions. I'd like to make one comment, because Rob, one of the things that you asked, kind of some questions before we got together was, what did you learn this year at all? And there's one thing I wanted to make sure I remembered to say. So I'm in my car. Well, I'm in a rental car right now. I'm on vacation in Scottsdale. I'm not in my usual background, but I have a cousin here. So I went to my cousin's house for dinner 2 nights ago, and she has a husband who I've met once or twice before. And so we're chatting, and I tell him, what I do. He goes, I collect cards. I had no idea. He takes me into his bedroom.
I love moments like this when this happens in real life, by the way. Yeah. Stacks of binders and boxes and unopened product, modern. Then he takes me into the office. Stacks of unopened cases of like Panini basketball and football cards, Topps baseball cards. Into the closet. He goes into his safe. He pulls out. He says, yeah, open that drawer. I open it. Blasters and hobby box, like unopened. The guy, he's like, I don't even have time to open this stuff. But what I learned is that this guy has zero social media activity in the hobby. So what I learned is that the hobby is not Instagram. The hobby is not Facebook. It's not Twitter. It's not YouTube. And it's not all of those things together. It is a lot bigger
than what we see on a day-to-day basis. And it's not that I necessarily learned that, but it really just hit home for me that, I mean, this is one guy that I happened to kind of reconnect with 2 days ago at the end of 2022. How many people are there out there like that are collecting but do not take part in any social media? And so because there's a lot of people, I've seen all sorts of social media postings where it's like the undertone or the assumption is that everyone's on Instagram.
Oh,
it just is not the fact of the matter. And this guy who's close enough, I should have known that he's been married to my cousin for, I don't know, they've got an 11-year-old, so like 12 years probably, right? At least. And I had no idea that this guy collected cars. So of course I had the best time at his house looking through stuff, you know? So that's what I learned. That's one of the things I took away from this year. The hobby's a lot bigger than Instagram and other social media platforms.
Well, Jeremy, you nailed because that's another one of the false pieces of logic that permeate the hobby, along with the everything has to be versus. You just nailed if I don't see it, well, it can't be true. You know, right. It's like, guess what?
Tree falls in a forest.
What you don't see, there's a lot out there. My version of the guy you just mentioned, a director I was working with. This guy has done tons and he's directed so much television, major hit shows, and older guys, probably like late 60s. We're talking, and I made some kind of Mantle reference. He was like, "Oh, Mickey Mantle, blah blah," and he's like, "Oh, I got to show you something one day." And then I just start getting texts from a number, right? Like a couple weeks later, and it's like, little did I know he had directed some pieces, like I guess I don't know if it was public service and something he directed commercials with Mantle, and he had all these like personally signed, like inscribed, like crazy inscription balls, and then he had Clemente balls and all, like unopened packs from like decades and decades ago. And I was like, oh my god! And like you would never know that this dude was such a hardcore collector. I mean, it's there's so much more than what's going on. It's all, again, what people can't see especially if their experience, let's say, is modern, where grade is very much a determinant of value. And then it's like, well, every 7's better than every 3. And it's like, because, that's what I see. And it's like, why be so definitive? I try to seek, there's a famous line in Glengarry Glen Ross. You guys know that movie? It was a great play where I think it was Pacino was chewing out Kevin Spacey's character. He goes, never open your mouth unless you know the shot. Right? Like, get the information before you say something. If I think I'm shaky on something, I just won't say it. I want to ask experts. I want to get the knowledge before the other famous quote, right? Better to say nothing and be thought a fool than open your mouth and remove all doubt, right?
Didn't that movie come out before Keyboard Warriors came out?
Oh yeah. It's like I never saw a 3 outsell a 6, so that's not possible. It's like, well,
I've got a little way to sort of empirically test this as well. Is I follow results from every auction house, whether it's Mile High, Memory Lane, Golden, Robert Edward, PWCC. I'm following these as they're happening. And I see the hundreds and thousands of cards that sell in these auctions, especially the higher profile, the more valuable ones. And I would say, I've got a decent survey of the hobby content creation landscape, whether it's personal collectors who are on Instagram or content creators on other forms of social media. What percentage of those auction results do I ever see show up in the collections of the people that I associate with and that I follow? It's got to be less than 1 in 1,000. Maybe even fewer than that. So in other words, for every 1,000 items that I see sell on these platforms, I don't know who bought 999 of them. That's a way to numerically encapsulate the scope of this hobby relative to its presence online.
Wow.
And imagine being an online retailer. Like when I was at my cousin's place, a lot of the shipped from addresses were Dave and Adams. And Dave and Adams, Blowout, Steel City, all these big online retailers, they would have a better idea of how big this hobby is, but they don't know what Walmart and Target are doing. They don't know what the retail side of the hobby is doing. So it's so much bigger than any of us, I think, can fathom. And that's encouraging. And then you think about what happens when Fanatics really takes hold and starts flexing their marketing muscle, how much this hobby can grow into the future, which I think is a whole other topic. I don't know if we have time for it, but
and Chris, what about the private market is huge too?
Oh,
you know,
absolutely.
I mean, it's really interesting, especially if you're into very rare niche pieces, right? Like, for example, like what I try to do with trying to locate pretty looking signed Mantle cards from the 50s and 60s from his playing days. More goes on the private sales market among the handful of guys that are into that.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I know more M101s that are trading hands, you know, or did in the past trade hands privately than on the auction circuit.
Yep.
Right. 1914 Joe Jacksons, they're trading hands in the privates because it's better. Who wants to? You got to take care of the middleman. You got to take care of the auction house on both ends.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much incentive to get a private deal done.
Yes, there is.
Right, but amongst collectors, that is a whole other market that's taking place. And then you have people like, well, I didn't see, according to this and this now again, sure, that's just the data that's available, but we still have to acknowledge that there is a very active collector to collector marketplace for which there is no data, and it behooves a collector that's interested in whatever the material is to try to obtain that data. Befriend collectors who are part of that. What sales do you know? Did you know both ends of the transaction to make sure it's true, right? And that becomes very important data and to share. So, but again, you got to know what you don't know so you can try to find out what you don't know.
Agreed.
Well, guys, we have to wrap up. We are out of time. This was an incredible roundtable. I want to thank you very much, guys, for coming on. Let's go around one last time. And Chris, if they want to reach out to you, if anyone has any questions, how can they find you?
Yeah, easiest way is just Instagram, Chris_Hoge. And thank you, Rob, for having me. Matt and Jeremy, it was a pleasure, guys.
Absolutely. Jeremy, how can they find you?
Instagram, JLEE_sports cards live. And I'll echo what Chris said, Rob. This was fun. Thank you so much for having me. And it's been great to spend time with you, Chris, as always, and to meet you and converse with you, Matt. Look forward to more of that in the future.
Yeah.
Which by the way, Jeremy, when the voting came up for like the best hobby content show, I don't know. I think it was Lucas Tigers and Bronze that put it out there, or something like that. Crossover was on there, I believe. I was on there, dude. The Sports Card Live army just like completely flooded the comments. Okay, your people are that was ridiculous. I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm like, oh, I'm getting some votes. That's kind of cool. All of a sudden, I start scrolling, nothing but Jeremy Lee. Nothing but just.
Oh my God. I said, take me off of this poll, man. I don't even want to be part of this.
I know. I'm like, take me off. Take me off. I don't even want to be. You know? So
I was grateful for all the support, for sure.
Nah, listen, well deserved, man. Well deserved. You put out some incredible content. Matt, once again, man, thank you very much. How can they reach you?
The Matty C _collection on Instagram would be the way.
Beautiful. Guys, the dumpster fire lived up to its name. You guys were a hot mess served on a cold plate. Thank you very much, guys, for coming on. And thank you to all the listeners and watchers for listening. And it was a pleasure, guys. Take care of yourself and your collection.
See you guys.